The stagecoach rattled violently as it descended the last dusty hill into Promise Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878. Dust billowed through the cracks of the wooden transport, coating Delilah Zimmerman's already soiled traveling dress. Her trembling fingers clutched the wrinkled letter that had brought her 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to this desolate frontier, a marriage proposal from a stranger named Zachary Sutton. Delilah peered through the dirty window at the town ahead, if it could even be called that. A single main street lined with weathered buildings, most little more than wooden shacks with ambitious false fronts. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside what appeared to be a general store, and the driver called out, "Promise Creek! End of the line!" Her heart pounded against her ribs like a desperate prisoner. What had she done? Trading the familiar misery of her uncle's home for the unknown terror of marrying a man she'd never met. The other passengers disembarked, leaving her alone with her small carpetbag, all that remained of her former life. "Last stop, miss," the driver said, opening the door and extending a weathered hand. On shaking legs, Delilah stepped down into the dust and blinding sunlight. The heat hit her like a physical force after the relative coolness of the coach. She squinted, scanning the few people milling about the street, wondering which might be her future husband. A tall figure detached from the shadows of the general store porch. As he approached, Delilah's breath caught. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, dressed in practical denims, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. When he stopped before her, she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Clear blue eyes studied her with an intensity that made her flush. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's stubble. "Miss Zimmerman?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl. She nodded, unable to find her voice. "Zachary Sutton." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with gold from the sun. "Welcome to Promise Creek." Delilah curtsied slightly out of habit. "Mr. Sutton." An awkward silence stretched between them. She noticed his eyes taking in her travel-stained dress, the small bag at her feet. "Is that all your belongings?" he asked, gesturing to her carpet-bag. She clutched it tighter. "Yes, sir. I hadn't much to bring." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps disappointment. Delilah's stomach twisted. She wasn't what he expected. Too thin, too plain, too poor. "Well," he said finally, reaching for her bag. "Let's get you settled. You must be tired after your journey." When their fingers brushed during the exchange, Delilah flinched, pulling back as if burned. Fear flashed across her face before she could mask it. Zachary stilled, his expression softening. "Miss Zimmerman," he said gently, "I know this ain't easy. Coming to a strange place, agreeing to marry a man you've never met." He stepped back, giving her space. "You have my word I won't rush you. You can have your own room at my ranch until you decide if you want this marriage." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by confusion. "But the arrangement can wait," he interrupted. "I needed a wife, yes, but I don't want one who's terrified of me." His eyes held hers. "You're not property, Miss Zimmerman. You're a treasure I never expected to find, and I aim to treat you as such." The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to appear weak. "Come on," he said, leading her toward a wagon parked nearby. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. We can talk on the way, get to know each other a bit." As Zachary helped her onto the wagon seat, his hands were careful, respectful. Delilah realized this was perhaps the first gentle touch she'd received since her parents' deaths 3 years ago. They set off down the dusty road, the town quickly falling behind them. The landscape opened up around them, vast, golden grasslands stretching toward distant mountains. The enormity of it made Delilah feel small and vulnerable. "How was your journey?" Zachary asked, breaking the silence. "Long," she answered honestly. "I've never traveled so far before. What made you answer my advertisement? If you don't mind my asking." Delilah hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. My parents died of influenza 3 years ago. I was sent to live with my uncle in Philadelphia. Her fingers twisted in her skirt. He made it clear I was a burden. When I saw your advertisement in the newspaper. She trailed off. Zachary nodded, not pressing for more. I've been on my own since I was 16, he offered instead. Worked cattle drives, saved every penny until I could buy my own spread 5 years ago. It's not much compared to some, but it's mine. Why did you send for a bride? She asked, curiosity temporarily overcoming her shyness. He smiled slightly. A man gets lonely. And truth be told, running a ranch takes more than one pair of hands. The neighbors help when they can, but... He shrugged. I wanted someone to build a life with, not just a housekeeper. The simple honesty in his words touched something in Delilah. For the first time since arriving, a glimmer of hope sparked within her. As they traveled, Zachary pointed out landmarks, a rock formation shaped like a sleeping giant, the creek that gave the town its name, distant mountains where he sometimes hunted in winter. Delilah listened, gradually relaxing as the miles passed. There it is, he said finally, gesturing ahead. Sutton Ranch. A modest but well-kept house came into view, surrounded by several outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling grasslands. It wasn't grand, but it had a settled look that spoke of care and hard work. It's lovely, Delilah said sincerely. Zachary's smile reached his eyes this time. It's home. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag into the house. Inside was simply furnished but clean and orderly. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with comfortable-looking chairs drawn up before it. Bookshelves lined another wall, surprisingly full. You read? Delilah couldn't hide her surprise. Every chance I get, he replied. Not much else to do during the long winter evenings. He showed her to a small bedroom off the main room. This will be yours for now. The master bedroom is across the hall. A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks. Like I said, no rush on anything. Delilah nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Zachary, he corrected gently. Or Zach, if you prefer. We may not be husband and wife yet, but Mr. Sutton seems mighty formal for two people sharing a roof. Zachary, she echoed, testing the name. And I'm Delilah. Delilah, he repeated, and something about the way he said her name made her heart skip. I'll let you get settled. Supper in about an hour? After he left, Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything. The man was nothing like she'd feared. She'd expected someone rough, demanding, perhaps even cruel. Instead, Zachary Sutton had shown her only kindness and consideration. But experience had taught her to be wary. Uncle Malcolm had seemed kind at first too, before revealing his true nature. She would remain cautious, no matter how sincere Zachary appeared. She unpacked her meager belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a nightgown, a hairbrush, and a small portrait of her parents. Last came the most precious item, a book of poetry her father had given her for her 16th birthday. She tucked it beneath her pillow, a talisman of better days. That evening, they shared a simple meal of stew and cornbread. Zachary proved to be a decent cook, explaining that he'd had to learn or starve when he lived alone on the range. He didn't press her to talk but filled the silence with stories about the ranch, the town, and the people she would meet. As they washed the dishes together afterward, Delilah insisting on helping despite his protests, she felt herself relaxing further. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that calmed her frayed nerves. Days passed, falling into a routine. Delilah took over the cooking and housekeeping, grateful to contribute something. Zachary worked from dawn till dusk, tending cattle, mending fences, and all the endless tasks required to keep the ranch running. In the evenings they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking. She learned that Zachary had come west after his parents died in a fire that consumed their small Illinois farm. He'd worked his way across the country, taking any job he could find until he landed work as a cowhand in Arizona. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, building a larger house someday, perhaps adding an orchard. In turn, Delilah cautiously shared stories of her childhood in Boston, where her father had taught at a small college. She spoke of her mother's garden, the books they'd read together, the music they'd played. She carefully avoided mentioning her time with her uncle, though Zachary seemed to sense there were shadows she wasn't ready to reveal. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. A comfortable silence had fallen between them. "You're different than I expected," Zachary said suddenly. Delilah tensed. "How so?" He seemed to choose his words carefully. "Your letters were so proper. I pictured someone more rigid, I suppose. But you laugh at my terrible jokes and get dirt under your fingernails in the garden without complaint." "I was afraid," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "When I wrote those letters, I was trying to sound like someone a respectable man would want as a wife." Zachary turned to look at her, the fading light gilding his profile. "And now? Now I'm still afraid," she whispered. "But less so every day." His hand moved across the space between them, hesitating before covering hers. When she didn't pull away, his fingers wrapped gently around hers. "Whatever you're running from, Delilah, it can't find you here. I promise you that." Tears pricked her eyes as something tight in her chest began to loosen. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to consider that perhaps Promise Creek might truly live up to its name. The next morning, Zachary announced they needed supplies from town. "Would you like to come along? Meet some of the townsfolk?" Delilah hesitated. She'd been hiding away at the ranch, nervous about facing strangers. But she couldn't avoid it forever. "Yes," she decided. "I'd like that." The journey to town passed quickly, Delilah pointing out wildflowers she'd never seen in the East, Zachary naming them when he could. As they approached Promise Creek, however, her anxiety returned. "The people here are good folks," Zachary assured her, seeming to sense her tension. "A bit nosy maybe, but good-hearted." The general store was their first stop. A bell jingled as they entered, and a plump woman with gray-streaked hair looked up from behind the counter. "Zach Sutton! About time you showed your face in town again." Her curious gaze settled on Delilah. "And this must be your mail-order bride we've all been hearing about." Delilah flushed at the blunt description. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Miss Delilah Zimmerman," Zachary said, a protective note in his voice. "Delilah, Mrs. Henderson runs the store with her husband George." "Pleased to meet you, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, coming around the counter to inspect Delilah more closely. "My, you're a pretty little thing, aren't you? No wonder Zach's been hiding you away." "I haven't been hiding her," Zachary protested. "We've been getting acquainted is all." Mrs. Henderson winked at Delilah. "Well, you picked a good one, honey. Zach's the most honest man in the territory. Bit stubborn, but you can't have everything." Zachary rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "We need supplies, Mrs. Henderson, not your matchmaking." As they gathered their items, more customers entered, each stopping to stare and whisper when they spotted Delilah. By the time they finished their shopping, her nerves were frayed from the constant scrutiny. Outside, Zachary touched her elbow gently. "You all right?" "Just." And used to being the center of attention. "One more stop, then we can head back to the ranch," he promised. "The blacksmith has some tools I ordered." The blacksmith's shop was mercifully empty except for the smith himself, a mountain of a man named Daniel who greeted Zachary warmly. As the men discussed the tools, Delilah wandered to the open doorway, breathing in the fresh air. 3 men on horseback were passing by, and something about their rough appearance made her step back into the shadows. Their loud voices carried easily. "That's Sutton's wagon," one said, pointing. "Heard he got himself a mail-order bride. Eastern girl, supposedly. Bet she's ugly as sin." Another laughed. Why else would a woman come all this way to marry a stranger? Don't matter what she looks like, the third man said, his voice harder than the others. She's gotta be better than what they got at Rosie's place. Maybe Sutton will share once he's broken her in. Cruel laughter followed this remark, and Delilah felt sick. She backed further into the shop, bumping into something with a clatter. Zachary was instantly at her side. What's wrong? She shook her head, unable to repeat the vile words. But Zachary had heard enough. His face darkened as he looked toward the street. Those are the Wilkins brothers and their friend Tucker, he said quietly. Bad news. Stay here with Daniel. Before she could protest, he strode out into the street. Delilah moved to the doorway, her heart pounding. Wilkins! Zachary's voice rang out, stopping the riders. You got something to say about my intended, you can say it to my face. The men turned their horses. The oldest, a bearded man with a scar across his cheek, smiled unpleasantly. Just making conversation, Sutton. No need to get riled. Apologize, Zachary demanded, standing firm in the dusty street. The men exchanged glances, clearly surprised by the confrontation. Now why would I do that? The scarred man asked. Your woman ain't even out here. I'm here. Delilah hadn't planned to speak, but the words came anyway as she stepped out of the blacksmith's shop. She wouldn't hide while Zachary defended her honor. The men stared, clearly not expecting her appearance. Delilah lifted her chin, meeting their gaze despite her trembling knees. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then the bearded man touched his hat grudgingly. No offense meant, madam. None taken, Delilah replied coolly, though it was a lie. The men rode on, but not before the scarred one shot Zachary a look that promised this wasn't over. You shouldn't have come out, Zachary said when they were gone, worry etched on his face. I won't hide while you face danger on my account, she replied firmly. Something changed in his expression, respect, perhaps even admiration. Let's go home, he said simply, but the way he said home made it sound like something precious. They rode in silence for a while, the encounter in town weighing on them both. Finally Delilah asked, Who were those men? Zachary sighed. The Wilkins brothers, Jake, the one with the scar, and his younger brother Eli. The third was Pete Tucker. They run cattle on land north of mine, but most of their income comes from rustling and whatever else they can steal. Are they dangerous? He hesitated. They could be. They've never bothered me directly before. I don't have enough to make it worth their while. But now they think you do, Delilah said quietly. Because of me. Zachary's hands tightened on the reins. I won't let them near you, Delilah. I promise you that. She believed him, which was startling in itself. Somehow, in just 2 weeks, this man had earned more of her trust than anyone since her parents. That night, after they returned to the ranch, Zachary checked and rechecked the doors and windows before retiring. Delilah lay awake long into the night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie and thinking about the way Zachary had stood up for her without hesitation. No one had done that since her father died. Her uncle had allowed his friends to make comments about her looks, her manner, even suggesting she might make one of them a good wife despite being damaged goods, after a fever left her with slightly weakened lungs. She'd been nothing but a burden, a possession to be disposed of. But today, Zachary had faced down 3 dangerous men because they'd insulted her. Not because she was his property, but because she deserved respect. The realization brought tears to her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that perhaps this arrangement might become more than a marriage of convenience. Perhaps, in time, there might even be love. The next few days passed uneventfully. Zachary was often gone from sunrise to sunset, working the far reaches of his property. Delilah kept busy with household tasks, and tending the small vegetable garden behind the house. Each evening, they grew more comfortable in each other's company. One night, as they sat by the fire, Zachary hesitantly brought up the subject they'd been avoiding. We should talk about the wedding, he said. If you're still willing. Delilah's heart fluttered. I am, she said softly. Relief washed over his face. There's a preacher who comes through town every third Sunday. He'll be here in 10 days. That would be fine. She agreed, warmth spreading through her at the certainty in his voice. He wanted this. Wanted her. I know it's not the wedding you probably dreamed of, he said apologetically. Delilah smiled. I never dreamed of grand weddings, only of finding someone kind and honorable. She hesitated, then added quietly, someone like you. Color rose in Zachary's face, but his eyes never left hers. Delilah, he said, his voice deeper than usual. May I kiss you? The question caught her by surprise. In all their time together, he had been scrupulously respectful, never presuming, never pushing. That he would ask permission for even this simple intimacy moved her deeply. Yes, she whispered. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When his lips touched hers, the gentleness of it made her heart ache. It was a promise, not a demand. When they parted, Zachary's eyes were bright with emotion. I never expected to feel this way, he admitted. When I sent for a bride, I thought I was being practical. I never imagined I'd find someone who makes me feel like this. How do I make you feel? She asked, needing to hear it. Like I've found something more precious than gold, he said simply. Something I'd fight to protect, something I want to cherish for the rest of my days. Tears sprang to her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. I was so afraid, she confessed. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was terrified of what awaited me. But you, her voice broke. You've shown me nothing but kindness and respect. You deserve nothing less, he said firmly. They talked late into the night, sharing hopes and fears, dreams for the future. When Delilah finally retired to her room, she felt lighter than she had in years. 3 days before the wedding, disaster struck. Delilah was hanging laundry when she noticed a plume of dust in the distance, a rider approaching at speed. As the figure grew closer, she recognized Daniel, the blacksmith. Miss Zimmerman, he called, reining his horse to a stop. Where's Zach? Checking the north pasture, she replied, alarmed by the urgency in his voice. What's happened? Daniel dismounted quickly. The Wilkins brothers. They've been causing trouble in town, saying Zach stole water rights from them. It's nonsense. The creek runs through both properties, but they're looking for a fight. Fear clutched at Delilah's heart. They're coming here? I reckon so. Jake Wilkins was mighty drunk, talking big about teaching Sutton a lesson. Daniel looked grim. I rode out to warn you. I have to find Zachary, Delilah said, moving toward the corral where her mare was kept. You ever ridden across open country, miss? Daniel asked doubtfully. No, but I don't have a choice. Her voice was firmer than she felt. Which way is the north pasture? Daniel sighed, seeing her determination. Follow the fence line until you reach a stand of cottonwoods. He'll likely be somewhere near there. He handed her his pistol. Take this, just in case. Delilah hesitated only briefly before accepting the weapon. Her father had taught her to shoot years ago, though she never fired a gun this large. She saddled her mare as quickly as she could, the task made difficult by her shaking hands. With the pistol tucked securely in her pocket, she set off at a gallop, following Daniel's directions. The open prairie was disorienting, distances deceiving. What looked close could be miles away, what seemed like minutes stretched into an hour. Delilah's city-bred eyes struggled to pick out landmarks. Finally, she spotted the cottonwoods Daniel had mentioned. Relief flooded her as she saw Zachary's horse tied to a branch. She dismounted, calling his name. Delilah? Zachary emerged from the trees, confusion written across his face. What are you doing out here? The Wilkins brothers, she gasped, the long ride having winded her. Daniel came to warn us. They're coming to the ranch, looking for trouble. Zachary's expression hardened. Get on your horse, he ordered, already untying his own mount. We need to get back. They rode hard, but Delilah's mare couldn't match the pace of Zachary's stallion. By the time the ranch came into view, 3 riders were already approaching from the opposite direction. "Stay behind me," Zachary instructed, slowing his horse to let her catch up. But Delilah had not come this far, had not found this chance at happiness, only to cower while others decided her fate. She urged her mare forward until she rode beside Zachary, ignoring his look of alarm. The Wilkins brothers and Tucker reached the yard just moments before they did. Jake Wilkins smirked when he saw them, clearly relishing the confrontation to come. "Well, well," he drawled. "If it ain't the happy couple." Zachary dismounted smoothly, his movements controlled but ready. "What do you want, Wilkins?" "Just a friendly visit," Jake replied, though his tone was anything but friendly. "Heard you're getting hitched. Came to offer congratulations." "We appreciate the thought," Zachary said evenly. "Now you can leave." Jake laughed, a harsh sound. "That ain't very hospitable, Sutton. And after we rode all this way." His gaze shifted to Delilah, who had also dismounted. "Maybe your bride has better manners." "Leave her out of this," Zachary warned, his voice deadly quiet. Jake ignored him, addressing Delilah directly. "You sure you want to tie yourself to this man, sweetheart? Might be you'd prefer company with a bit more experience." Delilah felt rage bubble up inside her. This man, this stranger, presumed to speak to her like she was a possession to be claimed. Like her choice didn't matter. "Mr. Wilkins," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I chose Mr. Sutton because he is an honorable man. I suggest you leave our property before you prove just how different from him you are." Jake's face darkened at the implicit insult. "Got yourself a spirited one, Sutton. Might need help breaking her." Zachary stepped forward, fists clenched. "That's enough." Jake dismounted, followed by his brother and Tucker. "Maybe it's time someone taught you both some manners." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jake reached for the gun at his hip. Zachary lunged forward. And Delilah pulled Daniel's pistol from her pocket. "Stop!" she commanded, aiming the weapon at Jake. All 4 men froze, staring at her in disbelief. "Miss, you might want to be careful with that," Jake said, his voice less confident now. "I know exactly what I'm doing," Delilah replied. Her father had insisted she learn to shoot properly, saying a woman alone might someday need to protect herself. How right he had been. "Now you're going to get on your horses and leave. If you ever return, if you ever threaten my future husband again, I will not hesitate to defend what's mine." The words surprised even her. What's mine? When had Zachary become that? When had this place, this life, become something she would fight for? Jake seemed to weigh his options, looking from the gun to her face. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him she was serious. "Come on, boys," he said finally. "This ain't worth it." They mounted up, Jake pausing for one final threat. "This ain't over, Sutton." "Yes, it is," Zachary replied firmly. "Unless you want the sheriff involved. I'm sure he'd be interested in those cattle with altered brands I've seen on your property." That struck home. Jake's face paled slightly before he wheeled his horse around and galloped off, his companions close behind. When they were out of sight, Delilah's knees finally gave way. She sank to the ground, the pistol falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. Zachary was beside her instantly, gathering her into his arms. "That was the bravest, most foolish thing I've ever seen," he murmured against her hair. "They would have hurt you," she whispered. "And you stopped them?" He pulled back to look at her, amazement in his eyes. "Where did my shy mail-order bride go?" "She found something worth fighting for," Delilah replied simply. Zachary cupped her face in his calloused hands, his expression serious. "I love you, Delilah Zimmerman. I think I started falling the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, looking so brave despite your fear." Joy bloomed in her chest, warm and brilliant as sunrise. "I love you too," she admitted. "I tried not to." I was so afraid of being hurt again. Again? He asked gently. And finally, she told him everything about her uncle's cruelty, the humiliation she'd endured, the desperate fear that had driven her to answer a stranger's advertisement. Zachary listened, his face darkening with anger at what she'd suffered, brightening with pride at how she'd survived. When she finished, he kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "You're safe now," he promised. "You're home." 3 days later, they were married in the small church in Promise Creek. Delilah wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her alter, and wildflowers in her hair. Zachary couldn't take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows. The town turned out in force, curious to see the Eastern bride who had apparently tamed not only Zachary Sutton but also faced down the notorious Wilkins brothers. The story had grown with each telling, until some versions had Delilah single-handedly driving off a dozen outlaws. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the saloon temporarily converted to a more respectable establishment for the occasion. Delilah found herself surrounded by welcoming neighbors, women who offered friendship and advice, men who treated her with newfound respect. As evening fell, Zachary led her out to the wagon for the journey home. Their home. "Happy, Mrs. Sutton?" he asked, helping her up to the seat. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied honestly. His smile was tender, as he settled beside her. "You know, when you first arrived I told you that you were a treasure. I remember. I had no idea then how right I was." He took her hand in his. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Delilah. And I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of you. We'll be worthy of each other," she corrected softly. "That's what marriage should be." As they drove toward home in the gathering dusk, Delilah marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived as a mail-order bride with nothing but fear in her heart. Now she departed as a wife, filled with love and hope for the future. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. The West was still wild, life still uncertain. But she was no longer alone, no longer afraid. Whatever challenges came, they would face them together. And that, Delilah thought as she leaned against her husband's steady shoulder, was the greatest treasure of all.